Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today for episode, was it 48? Maybe 49 of the series, we are doing another little chunk of Winter's Heart, the 9th book in the series, this time basically the second quarter of it. Last week, when we went over the prologue and the first 6 chapters of the book, we were about 24% of the way through. We are now up to chapter 15, meaning I read chapters 7 through 14 over the past week, and we're now 49% of the way through. So right about halfway, I'm still doing pretty good. That second bookmark in there is marking out the spot where I'll be next week, so I guess I'll announce that now. Next week, we'll get up to chapter 25, so chapters 15 through 24 are what we're going to read for next week's diary. But as I said, this week we're covering chapters 7 through 14. I read for about 6.5 hours this past week, which makes for a total, combined with last week, nearly 13.5 hours. So, just chugging our way along. Feels like it's taken a little bit longer to read this one, though, if I gotta be honest. Last week I talked about how the first 6 chapters basically felt like they took forever and like nothing really happened in either of them. And for the most part, it's basically true. You could summarize what happened in those 6 chapters combined in like a paragraph or less, and that would be right about all the plot progression that you got from that. And to start this week's reading, the first few chapters, I think it was like chapters 7 and 8. It might be chapter 9 as well at that point. You have a couple chapters at the beginning of the reading this week that I also kind of struggled through, that just took forever to get through, that felt like they took a long time to read. Coming off of Path of Daggers, for example, I never felt like that book was slow. I never felt like that one was taking me a long time to read. I read it quite quickly, and I never really struggled to read it when I was picking it up, and nor did I ever feel any reluctance to pick it up when I wasn't reading it. This one's been a little bit of a different story. The last few chapters of the reading this past week have picked things up a little bit, to the point that a couple of the chapters that I've just read have been maybe packed with too much information or disproportionately packed with stuff that it's actually hard to keep track. But even early on in the week, things were a little bit slow. But where last week we carried on with Perrin and Zarene's plotline and everything that's going down with them, this week most of the storyline has to do with Elaine's plotline in Caemlyn and her, attempting to make her place on the throne of Caemlyn. And so that's basically what we're covering. There's a little bit of other stuff besides. There's a couple of auxiliary POVs that we got with some pretty interesting information. The most recent chapter actually had, I believe, a first-time POV, a pretty important character that I think is going to have a major role in a plotline that we haven't really seen on the page for a little while, that being Matt's plotline, in which, next week's reading actually starts off with Matt, if the first sentence of chapter 15 has anything to go off of. So that's something I'm pretty excited about. But aside from a couple of these auxiliary POVs, just about everything else has had something to do with Elaine's plotline. So I suppose with all of that dilly-dallying out of the way, we might as well actually talk about some of the spoilers, like what actually happened. Well, chapters 7 through essentially 10 really are almost entirely Elaine's plotline, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll go ahead and cover all of that in one big group. In chapter 7, The Streets of Caemlyn, we see Elaine riding with some of her women's guards, some guards that Birgitta has basically taken it upon herself to be the queen's guardswoman, and to basically hire guards for Elaine to keep her safe while she's in Caemlyn, and coming up against, so many oppositional forces between, actual bad guys, but then, just political opponents as well. So chapter 7 sees Elaine riding with some of them, riding through the city specifically, basically making her presence known to the people of Caemlyn, to assure them that she is here, and to hopefully kind of implicitly bolster her support and presence in the city. But then about halfway through the chapter, with Birgitta being bonded as Elaine's warder, Elaine's able to kind of tell what kind of general mood Birgitta is in, and can tell that she's pretty upset about something and is making her way closer to Elaine about halfway through this little tour. So Elaine is cutting off her gallivanting through the city a little bit short and goes to meet Birgitta, where it is reported that an escort for a couple of Elaine's oppositional parties was ambushed and killed. I don't know precisely like all the details of what was going on with all of Elaine's oppositional parties, but there was an escort for some of them kind of moving around. I can't quite recall if it was them going from Erangel just outside of Andor to Camelin or going the opposite direction, but something about some escort party essentially was ambushed and killed. Elaine's oppositional political opposition essentially being able to run free. There wasn't any sign of them left over, at least if I was understanding the scene correctly, which basically everybody, puts their heads together and comes up with the determination that this means that there's a spy somewhere in the palace. What they're going to do about it, we don't really know, but there's definitely a spy in the palace to some degree. Elaine surprises one of her escort was an Aes Sedai by the name of Saritha. She surprises this Aes Sedai with some of her political acuity, her interpretations of the things that are going on in the city and in the country, if that's technically the proper term here. I don't think it is, but just go with me here. Elaine takes the information and all the updates about what's going on in Camelin and Andor with a little bit more, like I said, acuity than I think some of the other people are expecting, which makes sense. She was raised by Morghese, so that's kind of how things go. Elaine also argues in the scene with Birgitta about their sort of relationship as warder to Aes Sedai, and particularly in the context of, who's got more right to basically have the final say over what to do about Elaine's personal bodyguard. Birgitta is pretty insistent about Elaine being guarded, but Elaine doesn't really want much more going on around her personally, but the actual details of what's going on there is a little bit less important because it ends up happening that Elaine has a bodyguard just anyway. It happens that way. And Birgitta is the one who's basically in charge of all of that. So in chapter 8, we have Elaine meeting with her sort of personal advisor, is her name pronounced Renee Harfor? And Renee tells her of the suspicions that are kind of going around the castle of a couple potential spies that are out and about, and also, informs Elaine of some of the responsibilities and duties that she kind of still has to follow through with, things that are immediately on the docket that she needs to take care of within Camelin. So Elaine takes all of this information and shortly afterwards ends up being confronted by Vandene, who comes with a couple of novices who were previously kin. And these novices and Vandene kind of announced together to Elaine that the murderer of Ispin and Adeleas from the last book, when the Aes Sedai were trying to question Ispin as a Black Aja to try to get basically any useful information out of her, she was murdered, as well as Vandene's twin sister Adeleas, who was kind of involved in that. These two were killed. The supposition that is made in this moment is that the murderer of Ispin and Adeleas must be one of the other sisters in the palace. Most notably, that I noted, Saritha was one of the ones named. I think there's like 3 specific Aes Sedai who could potentially be that killer. Saritha was one of them, so that kind of raised a red flag in my head, but it also, stands to reason that whoever was the one to commit this act is most likely Black Aja in that case, and may also be the spy suspected of being in the castle. So if there's something like this going on, it's probable in my mind that those are one and the same. No idea, no theory whatsoever which one of the Aes Sedai is probably, the Black Aja. Nynaeve also shows up in this moment, and it is determined that Vandene will be the one overseeing the novices, these 2 kin novices, primarily since Elaine has political duties and Nynaeve has to teach the sea folk stuff. So there's just kind of a little bit of bickering about who's taking care of what, given everything that's going on. Little argument in the moment. After that's all said and done, Nynaeve and Elaine have a little bit of discussion where Nynaeve tells about how she sent several of the kin out to find, more extraneous kin out among some of the Shan-Chan areas to try to bring some of them back into safety, and the pair of them wonder together about how Egwene specifically plans to actually incorporate the kin into the White Tower, since that promise has been made, that offer has been made to all of them, including two kin who, don't actually have enough power with the power to obtain the shawl. So they kind of wonder about some of that going on. At the end of the chapter, Elaine finally comes to a meeting with Rianne as well, and they learn that some of these Soldam that are in Camelin, that are around, that were kind of left here implicitly by Rand, because he was supposed to have Taim basically hand over some of these Soldam, some of these Ashan-Chan folk over to Egwene and that group of Aes Sedai, but they ended up in Camelin with Elaine. They learned that some of these Soldam are effectively like on the brink. Some of the Aes Sedai are studying them, and these Soldam seem to be like on the brink of being able to channel. Like they're right there. It's almost like a mind over matter type of thing, where they so strongly believe that they can't or should not be able to, that like they can't, even though they could maybe be able to if they were convinced of it, that kind of thing. Elaine is trying to use some of the Soldam at this point, trying to convince them through the other Aes Sedai that they can actually channel, that they can do that as a means of sort of upending certain aspects of Shan-Chan culture. So that's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know what role that particular idea is going to have on the series moving forward, but I do find it really interesting, really intriguing. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of development comes from that, because yeah, if it turns out that all of the Soldam, or most of the Soldam, or something like that, some group of them can actually channel, not just implicitly, but I don't know, maybe is there the sort of implicit suggestion here that some of them are like right on the brink of being able to, like, kind of implicitly learning, quote unquote, how to do it because of being able to control people who do channel using the Adam bracelets? I don't know precisely how that works. I don't know what the suggestion is, what the actual, implicit information being revealed here is, but I guess there's some interesting potential for how some of that could go. And like I said, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what happens with that information, but we don't know. Either way, there's also some discussion here in the meeting with Rianne about what to do about the Damani themselves. And it is mentioned that one of these people in particular is more powerful than Nynaeve, or definitely has the potential to be more powerful than Nynaeve. And that's saying something because, well, Nynaeve is one of the strongest, if not like the strongest Aes Sedai in a while, or has the potential to be the strongest in a very long time. So interesting information all around here. Chapter 9 is a little bit more active, we'll say. There's a little bit more of an exciting moment, if for lack of better term, I guess, in the chapter. Early in the chapter, Elaine receives reports from various sectors of the world from another one of kind of her advisors in the castle named Hal and Nori. Amongst the information that Elaine receives here are that a good resource, I forget what the resource is called, but there is a resource that has been found somewhere within Elaine's sort of technical control, which she is now able to use, or would like to use as leverage with some of the bankers in Camelin to kind of drum up a little bit more of her support and, be able to get like loans, essentially to be able to pay for more of an army, since Elaine is trying to raise an army to kind of, again, bolster her support a little bit in the area. So there's some of the background political stuff that Elaine's considering here. We also get a little bit of information about the White Tower recently acknowledging Rand as the Dragon Reborn, and also offering him aid, quote unquote, the ability to come to the White Tower for aid, which, kind of screams trap in every way, shape, and form. I can't remember if this particular proclamation was made in the last book or two, like from Elaine's or Alviarin's POV, but I'm presuming it was one of those things. I have a vague recollection of this, and I don't know why. But either way, that is something that Elaine is now getting reports on. And finally, Elaine also learns of Rand being attacked back in Carrion, and that he has since basically disappeared, that nobody knows for sure where he is at. Some rumor apparently in Camelin says that he went to the White Tower, because of the information that the White Tower acknowledged him. But we, of course, know, the readers, that he has not done that. But even so, that is the rumor going around. But after this meeting with Nori, after getting this information, Elaine goes to take her typical midday meal. And in this midday meal, there's some fork root in her tea, and that basically starts to incapacitate her. Dialin comes in to report some information to Elaine in this moment while she's having her meal. The information that she has to convey, and we'll come back to this point a little bit later, albeit briefly, is that there's a massive Borderlander army on the actual border of Andor. Who knows what that means? It could mean really anything, but again, we'll talk about that a tiny bit more here in a couple chapters. I forget exactly when. While this is going on, Elaine kind of realizes that she has been poisoned and that she's like kind of going out of it, and tries to raise an alarm of sorts to, try to do something about it. But Dialin herself, who's in the room, is unable to alert the guards, is unable to help Elaine actually alert the guards to this, and actually has to fend off a few assassins that have made their way into the room. And a mysterious man rescues the two women, or rather, Dialin has kind of already gone down. She survives, she's already gone down, and a mysterious man rescues Elaine from the assassins. So, some sort of plot going on against Elaine's life here. Pretty suspicious. Again, we'll come to this a little bit later. Kind of covering these early chapters actually off the top of my head, I think it mostly comes down to what I was struggling with early on with Elaine's chapters, is less about like nothing really happening, but more so it just moving at a slow pace and not feeling super relevant, like a lot of it just kind of being her getting reports of extraneous information, and that largely being the extent of what gone on in these couple chapters. But already by this time that I'm at chapter 15 here, having read through chapter 14, a couple of these points have actually already been kind of addressed to some other degree, or we kind of already know the direction of where those particular tidbits of information are going. So that like actually makes it, looking back on the chapters, I'm like, maybe some things actually did happen. It was just, a struggle to push through some of it for some amount of time for whatever reason. So, I guess that's a consideration that I should throw out there. Anyway, we still have a few more chapters to run through, so we'll talk about chapter 10, which was a long chapter. This one took a long time to read, and I'm pretty sure is the longest chapter of the book up to this point. We have Elaine waking up from, having been affected by the fork root tea. She's been given herbs by Nynaeve, it turns out, to kind of help her recover, help her to wake up. Nynaeve had also healed Dialin. That's kind of how we know that she survived, is Nynaeve was able to help her and help her recover as well. Elaine suggests that the woman, Dialin, was previously, like, kind of up to this point, one of Elaine's, like, primary political opponents, even though she, like, has up to this point used the facade of being in support of Elaine. We kind of get the idea, the clue, that she is not trying to subvert Elaine, because Dialin very clearly had the opportunity to assassinate Elaine right there, or to help in the assassination, or something along those lines. Certainly did not have to help, did not have to confront the assassins, the actual assassins, directly to, essentially sacrifice herself to some degree to save Elaine, but she did. So Elaine's pretty convinced that Dialin is at this point more or less proven to not be her direct opponent anymore. She's proven loyalty to Elaine to a degree that is acceptable, and I'm actually inclined to agree with her on this front. But she also learns that the man that saved her, the man who took down the assassins, is known as Mellar, and in this meeting, Birgitte is kind of around as well, and Birgitte insists on, now after this assassination attempt has happened, Elaine actually having active on her person bodyguards. Elaine finally relents and agrees to do so, but while Birgitte is, kind of rambling on to herself about who's going to be, like, the head of this bodyguard group, Elaine basically says, the guy who saved me is going to be that guy. So Mellar is made the captain of Elaine's bodyguard group. Uh-oh. I didn't trust it from the very moment this kind of happened, but we will see here in a little bit of this very chapter why I was right to be very suspicious of this. Elaine and Nynaeve do go to Tel'aran'rhiod again, because this was an evening where they were supposed to meet Egwene over there, and they do that. They convey some of their learnings and tell some of the information that happened, including the attack on Elaine, and also we learn that Egwene already knew about the attack that happened on Rand. Presumably the wise ones over in Carrion reported to Egwene that way. Egwene has made up her mind by this point about some of the other considerations that we learned about last book based off of, Aes Sedai and the oaths and taking the 3 oaths, using the oath rod. I believe Egwene was considering for a little bit or questioning a little bit on whether it might be better for Aes Sedai to not have to take the 3 oaths or something along those lines. I forget the exact details of that, but there was a sort of train of thought going along those lines. By this point in this chapter, Egwene has made up her mind about Aes Sedai needing to do that is what makes them Aes Sedai, even though in the wake of meeting the kin and, all the questions that are going on with the kin and why they're so old, because so many of them are as old or even quite a bit older than any of the oldest Aes Sedai, it becomes a question or a theory, a working theory, that the Oath Rod is basically what significantly hinders Aes Sedai livelihood. That they live for quite a bit longer because of using the one power, but that something about using the Oath Rod to some degree is what causes their lives to only be like a few hundred years, maybe, as opposed to, maybe not even a few hundred years, be like a couple hundred years or something, as opposed to like several hundred years where some of the kin are. So there's some questions about all of the details regarding that. The group also discovers that they are being watched in the middle of this meeting in Tel'aran'rhiod by a mysterious man who has been eavesdropping them, and this is a man who isn't just like flashed into Tel'aran'rhiod for just a few seconds or something. This is a guy who like is watching them and then runs away when he is discovered, so not just some random dude. Definitely somebody who rather isn't supposed to be watching this meeting. That's probably the better way to put it. And they discover this guy, and for whatever reason, something about this guy reminds Elaine about some information that she hadn't actually conveyed to Egwene, that being that the Borderlander army in Andor, just outside of Andor, is there, and she decides in this moment in the chapter to basically use that army for herself. So she's probably going to make like some sort of group or deal or try to meet with this Borderlander army to support her in her claim for the throne. I guess I should also clarify the reason why she considers doing this is because she does not inherently assume that they are hostile. It seems to be the case. I don't remember what the exact details are, but it seems to be the case that that army seems to have come to Caemlyn potentially for something associated with Rand. That's why Elaine decides that she's going to try to use them for her own purposes. But after that, we have a couple of other scenes, a couple of auxiliary scenes that are not Elaine's POV. One of those scenes is, a meeting, a group of Liandrin's old group of Black Aja. These are Aes Sedai who have been, basically working with and for Moghedien to some degree for a little while, even though Moghedien has disappeared and has been kind of absent for a little while. They are apparently in Caemlyn. I'm presuming that this group of Black Aja is the group of Aes Sedai that Elaine doesn't know what to do with, that are kind of like just, hanging out in that one inn in Caemlyn. I don't know if that's the case or if this is a different group and like they don't know about them. But even so, there is this group of Black Aja just hanging out in Caemlyn because they were waiting in Caemlyn, essentially hoping that Elaine would show up here at some point because they are still trying to get after Elaine, and presumably Nynaeve would be with her. I would presume they're trying to get after Nynaeve as well, and maybe that'll help them figure out what's going on with Moghedien to some degree. Either way, it turns out this group is correct. Elaine is here now. And it turns out that one of the eavesdroppers that was, listening in on the meeting in Tel'aran'rhiod is one of these Black Aja that was amongst them. So all of that is pretty sketchtastic. There is then another scene to end the chapter off, which features a few oppositional forces from Ebu Dar that are also in Caemlyn for some reason, including the woman who's kind of going by the name of Lady Cheyenne, and also her maid, which is Phalion. These two are approached by David Hanlin, who it is revealed to be Melar, who is now captain of Elaine's bodyguard. So the actual details of this scene are a little bit more superfluous to me, but the fact that the meeting happens at all is really concerning, because now we know that a couple dark friends here, Black Aja, a dark friend, a very strong dark friend in Lady Cheyenne, And this man Mellar, who's now captain of Elaine's bodyguard, is actually David Hanlon, who I know he was in the last book to some degree, or the last couple books to some degree. I forget exactly what role he played, like what he did in those couple books. I just know he's not a good guy. This was definitely the chapter where some things started to happen for me, where I noticed that like okay, yeah, some interesting things are actually going down. Some interesting occurrences are actually happening here, and it was with these kind of scenes, with the Black Aja and with this, group here that was from Abu Dar, where there was a lot of names that I just only vaguely remembered. I was in the Wheel of Time Compendium app, like looking at all of these names, trying to remind myself who half of them were, because basically all of like the Black Aja specifically, I didn't remember 90% of those names at all. So I was looking them up, just like, what in the world is even going on here? It's a whole mess. We'll have another couple chapters here where there's a lot of like little things to keep track of. In this case, it was a lot of names. In another case, we'll get there when we get there. Either way, that's what happens there. We have another couple chapters that are a little bit more extraneous, not necessarily. I mean, I guess all things considered, they're still related to the same plot line, but we have a couple more characters intermixed into them. So I guess we can go over that. Chapter 11 sees our first Rand POV since the prologue, where Rand and Min emerge in a storeroom of the royal palace in Camelin. It turns out that, in the course of doing their whole shtick of appearing in a bunch of random different places to make it hard to guess where they're actually going to, they decide that they're also going to Camelin, because Rand intends to meet with Nynaeve about something and talk to Nynaeve about whatever it is that he wants to talk to her about. He has something for her and also for Mat, actually, because, this is a good example of like Rand doesn't actually know that Mat was left in Abu Dar, that nobody really knows what happened to him, and that he hasn't been in the picture of the series since the end of book 7. So, there's that. Either way, Min wants for Rand to see Elaine and Avienda. So that's something that we will see here in a couple of chapters, or maybe it's the next chapter. I don't remember off the top of my head, but either way, Min and Rand are going around to try to find Nynaeve. Along the way, pretty early on, they run into Harfer, which is, the one advisor of Elaine that we talked about. Min has Harfer take Rand to Nynaeve directly, while Min runs off, presumably to find Elaine and Avienda. Rand kind of learns through, being taken to where Nynaeve's at, that there are only a handful of Aes Sedai in the palace, even though he can feel a whole lot more people that are capable of using the power, that are capable of channeling, and he notices that very many of them don't have that Aes Sedai agelessness going on, so he's just like, how many Aes Sedai do you have here? And Harfer's like, well, that's none of your business, but we have like 5 of them, including Elaine and Nynaeve, and Rand's kind of distracted by this because he doesn't see Elaine and Nynaeve as full Aes Sedai. At this point, he doesn't even know that they've been raised by Egwene, let alone that Egwene is also full Aes Sedai technically at this point, because she was raised to Amyrlin, and that, there's all of that stuff. Rand has a lot to learn at this point, but either way, he learns that the Aes Sedai are here, or that there are some Aes Sedai here, but also knows that there are a bunch more people who can channel, even if they aren't Aes Sedai. Rand also, we get a couple moments of Rand whenever he thinks about or talks about Mat specifically. He sees a flash of color in his head, like a massive like headache inducing type of thing, and that the flashes of color in his head like looks like Mat or reminds him of Mat to some degree. I have no idea what that's about, but it is something that is mentioned here in his POV, and it's also something that is kind of reflected in other POVs, and just a couple other scenes where we see from like Nynaeve's character or Elaine's character, we see Rand have the same moments of, saying Mat's name or something about Mat being brought up and him having a flash and like grabbing his head in pain or something like that. Like I said, I have no idea what specifically is going on with this, but it is something to consider nonetheless. Either way, the scene switches to being primarily from Nynaeve's POV, I think, for the rest of the chapter, because something I should point out that I didn't really mention is that Min and Rand are here in Camelin, but Rand is currently under disguise so that nobody knows it's him. He looks like this much shorter and also a very ugly guy with a lot of warts. So Harfor is just taking him to Nynaeve, and it is the case that they are waiting for Nynaeve in her rooms. That's basically where that little section of the chapter ends. When we turn over to Nynaeve's POV, she's actually training some of the sea folk, something that we mentioned from a couple chapters earlier. She's training the sea folk in the power more or less at their command, particularly one named, I'm guessing her name's pronounced something like Talayan or something like that, who is the daughter of one of the like upper ranking sea folk amongst this group. Talayan seems to be pretty comparable to Nynaeve's strength with the power. That's another consideration. We have a handful of different characters here who seem to be really powerful with channeling Nynaeve. Talayan, there's that other one that I was talking about earlier. There's another one we'll mention a little bit later that also seems to have pretty heavy power. Anyway, Talayan is able to shield Nynaeve a couple of times while doing this training after, a little while of struggling. So that's an important thing. And Nynaeve basically has told all the sea folk at this point that it isn't possible to break the shield that somebody has on you unless you are significantly stronger than that person. And the sea folk basically have Nynaeve prove it. They have Talayan shield Nynaeve and basically hold that and just kind of watch and observe, basically forcing Nynaeve is like, you're going to try your absolute hardest to break out of this. Like, and I want to know that you try your absolute hardest to break out of this. And she gives it a go. They eventually let her go when it turns out that she has basically put in as much effort as she was. Physically is not the right term, but as she was physically able to put in to break the shield, and she wasn't able to break the shield. They know that Talayan and Nynaeve are pretty similar in their power. So they finally believe Nynaeve that it's like, yeah, okay, unless you're really much stronger than the person who has shielded you, you probably can't break their shield. Good to know. But yeah, all of that's going on. They eventually let her go, and then she leaves and is confronted out in the hall by a Shan-chan named Olivia, and this Shan-chan woman named Olivia is also really strong with the power, is apparently stronger with the power than even Nynaeve is. So Nynaeve, Talayan, Olivia, there's a few of these women who are noted as being really strong and being, in Nynaeve's kind of capability. So that's something that's interesting to note. Olivia tells Nynaeve that I guess Rhiannon and some of the other kinswomen are waiting for Nynaeve for dinner. They want to meet with her about something for some reason. Nynaeve's like, okay, cool, and sloughs her off. And Nynaeve kind of goes on her way, presumably to go meet with the kinswomen. I forget off the top of my head. But while she's leaving, Talayan happens to come out as well and meets with Nynaeve once again, following this whole charade of her shielding Nynaeve, all of that nonsense. Talayan comes and basically begs for Nynaeve to make her into a novice, however that works. She really wants to be not just Aes Sedai, she wants to be a novice. Nynaeve takes a little bit to even acknowledge that this request has essentially been made. It's just like, okay, I can see you really want to be a novice. And then Talayan basically cuts her off and says, okay, cool, thank you for promising that I'll be a novice. And then she runs, just leaves. It's like, bro, you didn't even let Nynaeve say that she can't just promise you that. So I guess we'll see what happens with all of that stuff. Finally, this is a moment where Lan appears to just kind of be there. Lan, Nynaeve's husband, of course, and takes Nynaeve to their quarters. When they get to Nynaeve's quarters here, they are met by Rand in disguise, obviously, in the company of Rene Harfor. Harfor basically opens this kind of dialogue, which is like, this man says he has something that you desperately want, Nynaeve. And Nynaeve's about to say, I have no idea what in the world you're talking about. And Rand basically butts in and says, hey, it's Women's Circle's business, and mentions a couple names specifically from the Two Rivers. And so Nynaeve is kind of struck by that, obviously, as she would be. This was the intent, is like, I didn't, and then reverses course and says, okay, I remember now, sends Harfor away, and as soon as she is gone, Rand reveals himself when Nynaeve's just like, who in the world are you? You're not. And then he turns into Rand. It's just like, oh, okay. I guess that makes sense now. But Rand does reveal himself. He learns from Nynaeve that Egwene is the Amyrlin seat, that Nynaeve and Elaine are Aes Sedai. So that's, some of that information that Rand has learned now. And Rand also, most importantly in this moment, gives Nynaeve a couple of ter'angreal that connect to the se'angreal of the Age of Legends, the big statues that correspond with the two halves of the power that Rand believes will be necessary for the last battle. And I think he also believes will be necessary for cleansing the taint on Sidon. So I guess I don't know if I understood that incorrectly or not. I guess we'll see. In either case, Rand essentially gives these couple of ter'angreal to Nynaeve and says, hey, this is what these are for. These are very important, and I need you to watch these for me. And then I also need you to be ready to come with me to actually use them. So I will need you at some point in time. He says that he has a few people that he needs to kill first, a few things that he needs to get done first, but that he does want Nynaeve's help to clear the taint of Sidon. And Nynaeve, I guess reluctantly, maybe not even reluctantly, it seemed like she's pretty eagerly agreed to do this, and not just to do this, but to go with him wherever he's going in order to do this. So instead of just Rand and Min leaving at some point in the middle of the night in Caemlyn here to disappear, Nynaeve's going to go with him. And I'm presuming that a large part of the motivation for this is because Nynaeve doesn't really want to face what happens when the Sea Folk come and confront her about, Talayan, presumably going back to tell them. It's just like, Nynaeve's promised to make me a novice. She doesn't want to face that. She doesn't really want to train the Sea Folk anymore. There's other stuff going on there that she's just like, I don't want to be here right now. And so she decides that she's going to go with Rand. Cool beans, right? Yes, but chapter 12 sees Elaine and Min and Aviendha coming to Nynaeve's quarters as well. Min has found the two of them and are bringing them to now meet with Rand. And in Nynaeve's quarters, they're just kind of there. They all do the shtick of professing their love for him and their desire to basically marry him all, that they're willing and able to share him, as kind of has been like a sort of auxiliary plot point here for several books. At this point, is like the three of them needing to acknowledge that they're all three meant to be with Rand because of a viewing that Min had. I believe that that's what the origin of that came from. But even so, this is the moment where they're just like, we're down for this. This is okay with us. And then Rand basically agrees with each that this is more or less okay with him as well. That he's just like, yeah, okay, I guess this is fate now, right? But then after this moment, they also take Rand to Elaine's chambers, and they all bond with him they all bond him as a warder together as a unit. So even though Min can't channel, Egwene and Aviendha have been practicing this way to kind of weave together a warder bond where they link, but then they're also able to link Min in with them, even though she's not able to channel. I don't know the technicalities of how that works, but I'll go with it for now. They're able to link the three of them together and then form a pretty, substantial warder bond themselves with Rand right then and there. And Rand now has 4 warders. This is also the moment in the book where Rand reveals that Alana had already bonded him. that had happened and that she hadn't talked to them about it first because, Elaine and Aviendha and Min were not going to tell Nynaeve about this. This is why they drew him back and took him to Elaine's chambers instead of saying in front of Nynaeve. It's just like, we all want to bond you now. Alana has already bonded Rand. That's not as fun. That's not as cool. And that's that basically. That's the major moment of the chapter. And then we also have Min and Aviendha leaving to learn more about each other, because obviously Aviendha and Elaine are first sisters. They're very close now, but Aviendha and Min are kind of hesitant about one another, so they leave to leave Elaine and Rand some privacy. We all know what's going on there now. And these two are specifically heading off to, I guess, kind of learn a little bit more about each other. Along the way, they meet Birgitta in the middle of a hallway. She's in a rage about what Elaine has decided to do now, because, of course, warders can kind of feel the emotions of the people that they're bonded with, and vice versa. And so all three of these people can actually feel what's going on between Elaine and Rand, which is hilarious and also disturbing in a weird way. But they're able to convince Brigida, it's like, no, it's okay. Elaine's an adult. You don't have to be this protective about her. Let's go find some alcohol and get drunk. And that's where that scene essentially ended, and it was hilarious. The chapter also finally ends with Elaine waking up the next morning with a lily in full bloom, even though it's the middle of wintertime, by her pillow. She does a little conservation type of bond or weave, I guess, to make sure that lily can now just kind of live forever by her bedside. It's a reminder. So that's pretty cute. But then she also learns in this moment as well that Nynaeve, Lan, and Olivia, was Talayan with them? I don't remember, but there's a list of people who are just suddenly gone. Rand and Min are obviously gone. Nynaeve and Lan are gone, so that's because they went with Rand. Presumably Nynaeve grabbed Olivia and brought her with her? Maybe? I don't know what's going on there. And then I can't remember if Talayan was mentioned amongst that group or not. Like I said, I forgot. But either way, a lot of people are suddenly gone from Caemlyn, and that's not great. So who knows? Maybe that means that some pretty cool stuff is going to happen in the back half of this book. The goal, presuming that Robert Jordan knows how to do pacing at this point, because sometimes I wonder, is Rand probably clears the taint on Sidon in this book. That's very clearly seems to be the direction that things are going, so I'm hoping to see some cool stuff along those lines. These last couple chapters are all auxiliary POVs. They're kind of different stuff that's going on, and basically all of them are like too much information that was difficult to keep track of. These were the 2 chapters that I read this morning that were like, bro, and then I spent a long time just trying to figure out, like, piecing together everything that happened. Chapter 13 was especially bad because it's just so much stuff to keep track of. I'm pretty sure I did not write down all of the more or less important things to note from the chapter, and I'm even more certain that the things that I did note, I probably got the information wrong in almost all these regards, because chapter 13 was just so hard to follow. There was so much stuff. It was just a lot. So chapter 13 is primarily, like the first, most of it anyway, is primarily from Cadsuane's POV, so back in Carrion, following obviously Rand having disappeared out of nowhere after the attack that the Ashaman had made on the palace. Cadsuane is in the middle of a huge political bubble in this moment, in the aftermath of this event. There's just a whole lot of stuff going on here, so let's try to just get through all of the points that I think I remember being made, and hoping that they're all correct. I apologize if any of this is just wrong. So, there seem to be some sea folk wanting the return of one AC folk named Shallan, who has kind of been, I guess imprisoned might not be the right term, but she's kind of been like held back for questioning, alongside another character called Ailil, concerning an affair that the two of them have been having, which I guess is something that was happening in the last book, and that Rand, I guess technically accidentally discovered after, the attack on the palace, but doesn't really do anything about it aside from like sticking the two of them under a bed for their safety, and also for his, because he didn't want anybody to, know where he went for a little while, or to know that he disappeared for a little while, and basically leaving these two under a bed, like kind of tied up and unable to escape from under a bed, would increase the amount of time it would take for anybody to know for sure that he left. Aside from those two, of course, I had to look up some stuff to even remember who those two characters were. When it came to Shallan and Ailil, I'm just like, who the even are these people, and why is this important? So I had to look some things up to just be like, okay, I remember now, I think. But that was the first thing. There's several more things. A number of Aes Sedai, it has turned out, have recently in Carrion separately been swearing fealty to Rand, who have like kind of not been intermixing with one another, but who have all just been swearing fealty to Rand, and Cadsuane is trying to figure out why in the world so many people are suddenly doing this. Like, obviously there are some that have done this already, but there's just some that have recently, in the wake of this attack, been doing it more so. So there's some questions about what's going on there. Related to this is a moment in the scene of Viren and Sorelea entering the room and talking with Cadsuane. I recall there being, some sort of alliance between Viren and Cadsuane Was it between those two? No, it was between Sorelea and Cadsuane, about the way to handle certain things. Well, their goals seem to be aiming in a certain direction, that they're going to be sort of friendly with each other and revealing information with each other, kind of things that are going on. So Cadsuane discusses with these two about some of what's going on. She discusses with them specifically about Shallan and Aileal for some reason, and talks about, the possibility of like blackmailing them for some reason, using the fact of their little affair that they had against them to get them to help them for something. We also learned from Sorelea that basically that all of the remaining Aes Sedai that have been apprenticed under the Wise Ones, that have, the ones that were trying to take Rand back to the tower, who didn't swear fealty to him directly, and I guess even the ones that did, they were all apprenticed under the Wise Ones so that Rand himself wouldn't directly have to deal with them. It turns out that like all of them now, every single one of them has now sworn fealty to Rand, or all of them who could still channel. And like I said, Cadsuane's trying to figure out why in the world this is suddenly happening, including with Red Sisters. There are even Red Sisters who are Red Aja Aes Sedai who are swearing fealty to Rand. Sorelei comments specifically that all of the remaining 5 in this particular scene, it's 5 that are said to have sworn fealty to Rand independently. They were not allowed to interact with each other, so there was no collusion between them that was made. Just like, oh, we're going to do this thing or whatever. They just all kind of decided to do it. So there's a lot of like questions about what specifically is going on there and why. A lot of interesting things. Someone brings information that there is an Ashaman who has healed one of the Stilled sisters, because of course when Rand escaped in Dumai's Wells, there were a few of those sisters that were stilled as a result of kind of what was going on there. And of those 3 sisters, I guess, in this scene, it's told to be 3 sisters. One of those has now been healed by one of the Ashaman, and that Ashaman wants to try to heal the couple of them that are remaining. Interesting information. Obviously, Nynaeve is not the only person to know how to heal somebody. We now have the information that there's an Ashaman specifically who knows how to heal Stilling at this point. And I guess probably important point, and I don't know if I've even discussed this at this point. It was interesting to learn about this particular moment because back when Nynaeve healed Logain, Logain was healed back to full power, to full strength. But when Nynaeve healed a couple of the sisters that had been stilled, like Swan Sanche and a couple of the others, that those particularly, that the sisters that were healed by Nynaeve were not healed to full power. So they were healed from the stilling, but not to their full power. But Logain was. So there's that kind of gender gap there, where Saidar was able to heal Saidin. But Saidar wasn't able to heal Saidar, again, to quite the same capacity. Over here, we have the Ashaman healing this one of the Stilled sisters, and she is specifically mentioned as being basically back to full power, like she's just like she was before being stilled. Obviously, there's some of the Saidar-Saidin stuff kind of going on, an interaction between the two, where men can obviously heal women from stilling up to full power, and vice versa, but they cannot heal, presumably, this is my understanding, that the male half cannot heal a stilled male and have that previously stilled male be full power when he does it, vice versa, like I said. So, I don't know. I just kind of found that particular detail pretty fascinating. But continuing on, there are a couple more things that happen in this scene, where a separate Ashaman specifically enters the room, enters, this big conglomeration of a bunch of different political stuff, political information and reveals happening. And Ashaman also enters the room and reveals that Alana specifically has just collapsed out of nowhere, just kind of all of a sudden she has collapsed, and in such a way that when it is investigated, she can't be healed for some reason. She isn't being awoken or isn't able to just be healed. She's just kind of, I don't know, trance-like might not even be the term. She's just kind of unconscious. Don't know what's going on there. Does that have something to do with like the bonding that Nynaeve and Elaine and, sorry, not Nynaeve, Elaine and Aviendha and Min did with Rand? Did that have some kind of effect on Alana somehow? No idea. But it is something that happened. Also, one final thing is that Lord Dobrain also enters into the conversation at some point and discusses with Cadsuane about how he has basically allowed for a couple of people from Carrion to just leave. One of those being Lady Caroline, who I don't remember who Caroline is really at all, but apparently she's a political rival involved with the Sun Throne, so just kind of a, keeping her out of Carrion for some political reasons, I guess. And then also Lord Darlin was allowed to leave Carrion as well, because he is meant to be the steward of Tyr in the wake of Rand kind of being absent for the moment, I guess. I don't know if I understood any of that information right, or if I even had all the information in there in the first place. Like I said, all of that portion of the chapter was just so much. It was so much, and basically none of the names were familiar to me for more than a few seconds. Like, there was just so much of it that's like, I don't even know what's going on. It was another case of I just had to look up a lot of stuff to try to figure out what even happened in the chapter, and still kind of struggled to put things together. So I hope that I did an okay job, but we haven't even finished the chapter yet, because the end of the chapter has a second scene that is just a meeting. There's been a lot of these meetings and stuff in the book so far. That's basically everything that's happened. But there's a meeting in the second half of this chapter. Second half maybe isn't even right. It's a little less than half, but either way, it's a meeting of a bunch of Forsaken. Basically, all of the Forsaken are meeting in Tel'aran'rhiod. They all kind of reveal to each other that Rand's whereabouts are basically indeterminable, despite some of those Forsaken who are more or less meant to be watching him, to follow him, to make sure they knew where he was actually at to some degree or another. But they know that Rand's whereabouts are indeterminable as a result of him going to so many different places. So his plan there, I guess, worked as far as, throwing people off of his trail. But at some point in the meeting, we do finally have Moradin entering upon his arrival with Sindain. They all reveal that Rand has the Ter'angreal for using the Seangreal that he needs for cleansing the power. So somehow these guys know about this. Presumably one of these guys is, off the top of my head, it probably makes sense that one of the Forsaken was one of the eavesdroppers in the Tel'aran'rhiod meeting that Elaine and Nynaeve were having with Egwene. And that's why these guys suddenly know. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, sorry, but that's just a suggestion. Either way, the Forsaken know that Rand has these powerful artifacts that were, according to some of the Forsaken, supposedly destroyed, and according to some of the other Forsaken, is just like very dangerous, or whatever the case may be. It's something. It's information that they now have. It doesn't really matter. That's what's going on there. Rand has the stuff, and they know that he plans to cleanse the power. And Moradin basically tells all of the rest of them, says, hey, when Rand goes about doing the cleansing, you will know where he's at, and he basically tasks all the rest of the Forsaken to go after and capture him and kill him only if necessary. More plotting from the Forsaken. Again, this was just a chapter, or another scene of like, there's just kind of a lot of little details going on here, but yeah, that's what happens. Chapter 14 was also another chapter that was a lot. It was only 10 pages, but it was a lot because it's Shan-Chan, and it comes specifically from the POV of Tuon, who, am I understanding this correctly? Somebody please clarify for me. Is Tuon the Empress of the Shan-Chan, like the highest order Shan-Chan of the group that has come over here for Karen for the return? Is that Tuon? Is like she the top of the top? Am I understanding that correctly? Because based off of certain cultural stuff that were going on in this chapter, it was kind of really hard to determine if that was the case. And moreover, it was just a lot of cultural stuff. Like, basically all this chapter couldn't tell you, like, any of what happened in this chapter, because all of it was, like, cultural things that I'm like, I don't even know, man. I got the main information. We're following a woman called Tuon, who I think is the Empress, and she is docking at Ebudar, and that she was called by the narration in like the last paragraph of the chapter, the daughter of the Nine Moons, which, if my memory is not faulty, I know it is, but if in this moment I don't think it is. The daughter of the Nine Moons is something that Matt knows he's supposed to marry. Is he supposed to marry the Empress of the Shan-Chan? Is that what's happening here? I mean, I know chapter 15 here is about to be the start of Matt's plotline for the first time since, Check's Watch, the very end of A Crown of Swords. So presumably there's going to be some interactions between Tuon and Matt here. I'll be curious to find out more pretty soon, but I was just like, I don't even know what's going on. I just know it's Tuon. She's maybe the Empress, and she's also called the Daughter of the Nine Moons, and she's about to dock in Ebu Dar, where we know Mat was last at. Cool, that's what happened in Chapter 14. That's all I need to say. And that's going to wrap up this video. I know this this thing was a mess, man. I don't even know. And after last week's episode was so relatively short, we have another very long episode, and I am sorry. I don't know how much of that information was important, and I don't know how well I even kept track of very much of it, because, you know, when Robert Jordan finally decides to actually have something happen in his chapters, he has so much information in his chapters that it's like, bro, I don't even know what's going on anymore. Like, you've stuffed my little brain to full in 10 pages or something like that. And then you have other chapters that are like 10 or 20 pages that are like, bro, literally nothing freaking happened here. Like, what are you doing? So yeah, we get a little bit more of Robert Jordan's inconsistency here, but there were a couple of chapters there that were like, flew right over my head. I understood like half of what happened in this week's reading because of it. But either way, I'm still kind of, I guess I'm looking forward to actually continuing. Last week, I can't remember if I said this or not, I was a little bit more dubious about continuing. I was like, man, the book is just really slow. I'm having a hard time picking it up. And the first few chapters of this week's reading were still the same way. But given that we're actually hitting some Mat POV again, or presumably so, and there was this, you know, Shan-Chan thing that happened with the Daughter of the Nine Moons, I'm like, maybe something interesting could happen. And then, of course, I'm also looking forward to the finale, because I'm pretty sure that's when Rand's going to cleanse sight in, just kind of theorizing here. That's what I'm hoping to happen. But to reiterate back from the beginning of the video, we are starting chapter 15, or I'm starting chapter 15 here pretty soon, and I'm going to get up to chapter 25 for next week's reading. So the next 10 chapters, 15 through 27, sorry, 15 through 24. I don't know why I said 27, that makes no sense. But 15 through 24 is what I'm going to get through for the third week of reading with the book, and then the fourth diary here in a couple of weeks will be the rest of it. So yeah, I'll get through that, and I'll be back for another Wheel of Time diary next week. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you there.